All right, what's up, guys? We are kicking off our new Easter series, Famous Last Words. And we're going to kick it off and start it with a little, well, not a school pop quiz, but a fun pop quiz, all right? So your goal is to figure out what these three statements have, or four statements have in common. Ready? All right, they're going to be quotes by famous people. First one. I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have. So that, has anybody ever heard that before? Anybody heard that? No? That was actually the famous artist Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah, almost. Leonardo da Vinci, if you don't know who that is, he painted arguably the most famous painting of all time, the Mona Lisa. So obviously this guy had some pretty high standards for himself. All right, next quote. Money can't buy life. Money can't buy life. That was by Bob Marley, the famous Jamaican reggae artist. Here's a particularly meaningful one. Are you guys ready? Let's roll. These words were spoken by Todd Beamer on September 11th, 2001, right before he led the passengers on United Flight 93 to try to take back the plane from the hijackers. This next one is simple but deep. Happy anniversary. I love you. That was spoken by the greatest football coach of all time, Vince Lombardi, as he was talking to his wife. All right, pop quiz time. Here's the answer. Does anybody know what all those statements have in common? Anybody? No. Yeah, there's a hint right there. They are all famous people who stated these famous last words before they passed away. I know it's a little bit morbid, but honestly, when you think about it, there's a lot of really poignant things that are said by people before they die. Here's what I mean. Da Vinci was basically saying he had unlimited potential. Bob Marley made a profound statement that life is about more than things. Todd Beamer made a statement of pure courage in the face of unspeakable terror. And Vince Lombardi's simple statement to his wife conveyed a deep commitment. You see, these words matter more because of when they were said. They weren't just shared on any random Tuesday in March at 5 o'clock. No, these words were measured, specific, and thoughtful. Why? Because when time is short and you know your time in this earth is coming to a close quickly, you don't want to say something trivial. No, you want your words to matter. Your last words on this planet to actually mean something. So for the next few weeks, we're going to look at some of the most famous last words ever spoken. And well, we are at church, and we are only a few weeks away from Easter, so it won't surprise anyone. Whose last words we're going to look at? Anybody guess? Yeah, Jesus' last words. Very good, very good. Yes, we are looking at Jesus' last words here on earth. Now, during his time here on earth, he said a lot of poignant, important things. But some of the most impactful, profound statements of Jesus happened mere days or even hours before his death on the cross. And to our benefit, those things he said right before he died were recorded by 4 of his followers. Their names were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, some of you may have kind of complicated feelings about the Bible, but no matter what you think about it, the truth is, the Bible is a great piece and place to go when you want to find out what Jesus actually said when he was here on earth with us 2,000 years ago. And whether or not you believe everything you heard about Jesus, no one can doubt that his words have shaped history and culture in an incredibly positive way. Even if you're a non-Christian, you'd have to admit that. And the fact that they were written down is a good thing for us because we all have a tendency to forget things. Anybody have a tendency to forget things? Whether it's your phone, your retainer, your homework, or the TV remote, whatever it is, we all, as humans, forget things. It just happens. But our tendency to forget things impacts more than just that. For those of you who have a relationship with God and call yourself a Jesus follower, our tendency to forget can play into that too, in a much deeper, more serious way. In fact, check this out. Forgetfulness can sometimes be one of the biggest barriers to us having a healthy relationship with God. And some of you are a little quizzical. That might sound a little strange to you, but think about it. Don't we all have a hard time remembering all the good things that God has done in our life when we're going through a difficult time? We're like, God, do you even care about me? Why don't you do something about this situation and help me? We tend to blame God for the difficult circumstance we're in right now, while forgetting all the great things that He's done for us in the past. We do the same thing with people around us too. When something is going wrong in a relationship and it's someone that we care about, man, we focus on what's happening now and we completely forget all the amazing things that person has done for us and all the incredible memories that we share with them, because we're only focusing on what's bad in the present. Here's one small example. Think back to the last time that you were sick. And I mean like really, really sick, puking your guts out, sick. Maybe you were so sick, in fact, that you thought some thoughts about God like this. God, why are you punishing me? Why are you allowing me to feel this way? God, do you even care about me at all? Yes, we all have a bit of a tendency to be a bit overdramatic when we're sick, myself included. Of course, being sick is awful, but you know what we aren't thinking about in those moments when we're kind of pitting ourselves, crying out to God, God, just heal me, why I feel like I'm dying, it's terrible. A lot of times when we feel that way, we forget about the 300 consecutive days before that, when God allowed us to be healthy. We forget about all the days that we could breathe freely through our noses, when we didn't have a headache, when we didn't spend hours over a toilet. In the moments that we're feeling our worst, we tend to forget all the days that God allowed us to feel great. And that's the problem when it comes to faith, because we all face situations where we're told we should trust God, that God is good, that God loves us, but we just don't, catch this, we just don't feel like it's true. We get so focused on what we're facing now that we forget what God has done for us in the past. We get tunnel vision only on what's in front of us in this moment. If we aren't careful, focusing on our present problems can convince us that God isn't there or that He doesn't care. But here's a question. When things go wrong, how can we make sure our attention and focus is not consumed by all the bad things in life that we're going through right now? To set up the scene for our scripture tonight, imagine this. Kind of take some context. 2,000 years ago, on this particular evening, Jesus and His disciples are sitting in an upper room about to share an important meal. This meal was known as Passover. And it was something the Jews would celebrate every year. Now, the disciples didn't know that this would be their last dinner with Jesus. But Jesus did. And you can be sure that He made sure every one of His famous last words matter. Imagine if you were having one last conversation with the people that you love most, maybe your family. Your words are going to forever be your last words on this planet. So, you're probably not going to talk about trivial things like your favorite Netflix show when you're on your deathbed, or the most recent Drake album. That's probably not what most of us are going to talk about when we're about to pass away. No. Now, if you're like me, you have no clue what you were going to actually say, but you do know that what you would say with your last words are going to matter. They're going to be important. So you want to make sure those words matter. It's easy to imagine Jesus felt the same way that we're about to look at in our passage tonight, the night before he died on the cross. Maybe that's why he didn't waste any of his famous last words. In fact, some of his last words shaped history and the future. They completely redefined what it meant to trust in God, to have faith in him. Hundreds of years before Jesus arrived on earth, God miraculously saved the Jewish people who were, if you've grown up in church, you've heard this story before, who were in slavery in which country? Egypt, thank you. Yes, they were in slavery in Egypt for hundreds of years, for centuries. They were in bondage to the Egyptian king, who was Pharaoh. That was Pharaoh. So, Pharaoh had the Jewish people build his kingdom for him, which was a great deal if you're an Egyptian, because, yeah, you had free labor. And so he probably wasn't really planning on letting that free labor go. But after centuries and centuries of crying out to God, God, deliver us! Help us! God sent a deliverer named Moses. And Moses, God sent him and his brother Aaron to Pharaoh to tell him what? You guys know this. There's probably a song you probably heard. What did Moses say to Pharaoh? Let my people go. Oh, you've heard that before. Let my people go, Pharaoh. God is telling you this. It's a serious message. You need to let us go. But did Pharaoh do it at first? No. He hardened his heart against God and said, no, I'm not. So then, most of you know the story, God sent devastating plagues on the Egyptians. And some of them were crazy. Fish were all dying. Frogs were going everywhere throughout Egypt, throughout the land. There was bugs everywhere. They were terrible. But Pharaoh continued to harden his heart against God and say, no, Moses, I'm not letting you people go. So God kept turning up the heat on Pharaoh. He sent one final plague, which was truly horrific. It was that all firstborn males in Egypt, both animals and humans, would die in one night. It's a lot of people dying at the same time. Devastating. To make a long story short, finally, after all the death in Egypt, there was one thing that happened that's very important. Because the Hebrews, which is what the Jewish people were known back then as, because they were God's chosen people, before this angel of death came, God told Moses, have the Jewish people sacrifice an innocent lamb, smear its blood at the door frame, and the angel of death pass over your house, and your sons will be saved. Scripture tells us every Jewish person obeyed that night. And not one Jewish firstborn male died. But all the firstborn males in Egypt did. So finally, a broken man, Pharaoh, finally said, leave me. Leave this country. You're free. with a triumphant exit. The Jewish people of God quickly left Egypt, left their captivity, left their slavery, and started a new chapter of freedom. From that moment on, to commemorate and remember what God had done for the Jewish people in Egypt, every year the Jews would celebrate what became known as Passover, because the angel of death had passed over their homes. I love that, because they made a habit every year of remembering. They didn't just assume they always know God was faithful to them, or that they always focus on how He is trustworthy. Instead, they set aside time, put it on the annual calendar, and got intentional about remembering, telling the story of how it happened. And just like many of our holiday traditions include a meal and food, so did theirs. And part of the meal included unleavened bread and drinking wine. And I know some of you guys are checking out right now. It's like, history lesson is where I want. Just stick with me for a few minutes, and I'll explain. All right. So an unleavened bread. You're wondering why we have a table here? Now you know. It's a prop. You guys know how much I love serving props. So this is unleavened bread. It's kind of like a cracker. And so the reason that the Jewish people always commemorated Passover eating unleavened bread is because when their ancestors left slavery in Egypt, they had to leave quickly. So quickly, in fact, they didn't have time to let their bread rise in the ovens. And so it was a reminder of that night, that when they were free and they left, that day they left slavery in Egypt. So that was a reminder, a tangible reminder. And then they also drank a cup of wine. The wine during Passover represented the blood of the innocent lambs that were sacrificed that night and smeared on, their blood was smeared on the doorpost. It was to remember what God did for them when He passed over their ancestors. So that is a basic summary of Passover. Right, got that? Cool, got it? Cool. Passover, got that. Let's go back to Jesus' Last Supper with His disciples, and that's why I have a dinner table sitting here, so you can kind of imagine Jesus 2,000 years ago sitting in the upper room with His disciples. So there's all sitting around gathered. Now, this brings us back to where Jesus is celebrating. Remember, Jesus was Jewish, so that means that He grew up celebrating Passover, like I just explained, with His family. Now He is doing the same with His disciples the night before He dies. Now they probably all knew as they were sitting there what came next, what you're supposed to say in Passover, how the story is told. But then Jesus does something new. Check it out. He took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then He broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." After supper, He took another cup of wine and said, "This cup is the new covenant between God and His people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you." Now, it may not sound like it to you, but this was actually a major point that Jesus was making. This was a big moment. Because if we put ourselves in the shoes of Jesus' disciples, we've just seen our Master talk about Passover, which we all celebrated, but then He was changing it all up. Like, they might not have understood exactly what Jesus was talking about, of that I'm going to sacrifice myself for you. You're going to eat my body and drink my blood. They might not have known everything, but they did recognize that Jesus was messing with their sacred Jewish tradition of Passover. So they were probably in shock at this moment. had always celebrated and remembered what had happened long ago in Egypt, but now, Passover is becoming about remembering Jesus, what he did. Remember, he hadn't died yet. That happened the next day. Jesus said that the bread and the wine represented his body and blood. In other words, he was saying this: these symbols now represent my incredible love for you, and you, and you, which has compelled me to live with you and die for you. Every time you eat this bread, drink this wine, I want you to do something really important. I want you to remember. Remember me. Remember my sacrifice for you. Remember my great love for you. So Jesus, during the Last Supper, changed the entire meaning of Passover from that night forward to today. Pretty cool, right? So what I love about this moment is that it's about so much more than a holiday. And Passover was a special time of remembering, but the symbols, the bread and the wine, well, those were just normal food for the Jewish people back then. They ate them every day. But Jesus made two, catch this, he made two of the most ordinary parts of their lives significant. Jesus wanted them to remember every time they ate and drank. Why? Because Jesus knew that life would be difficult and painful, not just for his disciples, but for everyone who read his words, including us tonight. Jesus knew that the moments when life goes bad and things get off track, we'll have a tendency to focus on the bad and forget the good. We'll wonder where God is and why he isn't doing anything about our circumstances. We'll forget that he died for us to demonstrate his great and unfailing love for us. Jesus knows that we have a tendency to forget. That's why in his famous last words, he gave his disciples a way to remember him. Simply put, Jesus said this: remember what God has done for you. That's our bottom line tonight. Go ahead and say it to your neighbor. If you're taking notes, go ahead and write it down. Remember what God has done for you. Now, for those of you who have been following Jesus a long time, I'm guessing there have been some significant moments in your life. Some significant God moments. Now, maybe for you, where you really felt God's presence, you felt like he really moved in your life. Maybe it was at a summer camp or a retreat. Or maybe you went on a mission trip and just really saw God move in your life. Or maybe it was through your small group, or your family. Maybe it was the first time you accepted Jesus as your personal Savior. In those moments, it's easy to trust him. It's easy to know that he's there and that he's good. But I'm also guessing that if you're like me, you don't feel that way every day. It's easy to feel far away or forget why you ever trusted him in the first place. If that's you, I want you to know something. God hasn't changed. He's the same as he was when you first met him, when you first experienced him. He's the same God that you encountered at that camp, or at that retreat, or at the beach. He's the same as he was at the first Passover and the Last Supper. God doesn't change. We just have to remember who he is and what he has done for us. So the question for all of us is how? Our next steps. So let's start with 2 ways. Our first step is this. Remember the ways in which God has been good to you in the past. The Jewish people observed the Passover meal to remind them of God's goodness, of his faithfulness to them, of his provision for them. In the same way, it's important that you and I remember those times when God showed up, when he was faithful, when he helped us through a tough season of life. So let me give you guys a couple minutes to start thinking in your head of that time in your mind that when I talked about it, that where you really felt like God showed up for you when you were going through a difficult time in your life. While you're doing that, I'll share a moment in my life, one of the most difficult moments in my life. Just to give you some background, I had a very close relationship with my grandmother. Even from a young age, I would tell people that she was my favorite person in the world. And I have a very close relationship with my mom, but Mom was a distant second to Grandma. I can remember being really little when we'd leave her house. She lived in Iowa. I grew up in Wisconsin. We'd drive back to Wisconsin. And I'd be in tears when we got back because I missed my grandmother so much that my mom would have to call her as soon as we got home. And I had to talk to Grandma to console me. I spent every summer from the age of 4 all the way to my graduation from high school, staying with my grandma for at least a week every summer in Iowa, just myself going there. That's how close I was to her. So even when I was younger, I knew I was getting older, which meant my grandma was getting older, and I knew the time had come when she was going to pass away, and I didn't like thinking about it. And then as she got older and older, and she was living in an assisted living center, she asked me and told me that she wanted me to speak at her funeral. And I remember saying, Grandma, try. I don't know. I'll probably be a mess. I don't know how I can do that. That for years was my greatest fear in life, was my beloved grandmother. And about 10 years ago, it happened. It happened suddenly. She was getting older, but she had told me for months that she was ready to go meet Jesus. But she passed away very suddenly, and I remember getting a phone call and just utter shock, and here's the moment I've been dreading for years. And I prayed to God to give me strength in this moment, just this unexpected thing I wasn't ready for and I've been dreading. But in the midst of her sudden death, and then having to drive to Iowa to go speak and give the eulogy at her funeral, I felt God's presence in a way that I had never felt him before in my life. In the moment when I walked up and stood in the pulpit at her funeral and her body was in front of me in the casket, I felt a peace that can only be described as God strengthening me and giving me courage to do one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, to explain in a packed church what my grandmother meant to me. So much so that God gave me almost a sense of joy that her suffering was at an end, that I knew, and I knew that I knew that I knew that she was in the presence of Jesus and that I would see her again. I didn't even shed a tear that day, which I was like, I never would have thought of that. That strength could only come from God. So that's one of my moments, one of the most difficult moments like where God showed up for me. You guys think of yours? That's step number 1. We need to remember ways in which God has been good to us in the past. Step 2, next step 2 is we need to revisit this list and add to it. It's one thing to remember God's goodness, but we need to keep going back again and again to those memories. Also pay attention when God shows up to your life today or next week or this month. And guess what? Add it to that original list that you keep going over again and again and again. Like we've said, over time we tend to forget things. The Jewish people didn't just celebrate Passover once in a while. They didn't just celebrate it when they were going through a difficult time. No, they celebrated it every year. They scheduled a specific, consistent, intentional time to revisit and celebrate what God had done when He delivered His people in a huge way. Remembering is what allows us to trust God, even when we can't see what He's up to. Because guys, as we wrap up, here's what I know. There's a 100% chance that everyone in this room is going to go through a difficult, challenging time in your life. And tonight, right now, is the time to decide that when that difficult moment comes in your life, it will not derail your faith and trust in God. None of us are exempt from challenging moments. Jesus certainly wasn't. But when you do experience challenges, you can lean on the one who has always been there for you in the past. Remember, you can remember what God has done for you. And invite our leaders to come to the front. Would you pray with me? Dearly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for these students. Lord, we know there's a sovereign purpose that each and every one of them are here. Every one of them have been drawn here by you. It's not a mistake that they're here. Lord, I pray that ears were open to hear your words, not my words, but your words, what you were speaking to the hearts of these students. That when difficulties and challenges come up and we're tempted to turn away and forget what you are, but to remember our bottom line tonight, to remember what you have done for us in the past, all the good things that you have done for us and shown up in our lives. Remind us all of that, Lord, the next time we face a challenge. Lord, I pray over all the students and the D groups that are about to take place. Lord, I pray that you would take down walls of the students and help them just to know that what's said and shared in their D group stays in their D group, that it's a safe place to be themselves, just to leave their masks and just be real with what they're going through, so that they can find real healing starting through your power. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Awesome. Well, we're going to transition to D groups, and so high school girls are going to be, you guys get a 3-option choice today. And so you guys can either be, high school girls can be either with Emma, or Donna, or Karen. High school guys are going to be with Brian right over here. Middle school girls are going to be with Avery, and middle school guys are going to be with me. All right, you guys are dismissed to your D groups. Have fun.
Josh, you kill the stage lights? No. Evan, did you check your phone?
Fellas, what's up? All right. East. All right, guys. We can review. Diego, you can start.
Yeah. I would give you... That's like
Best and worst.
just getting pictures of like friends at my school.
Good. What's worse then? What kept it from being a 10?
It's because right now, my girlfriend and her best friend are really
Okay. Lucas, you're up. What? Sorry, you have a prayer request.
Star test is 2 weeks.
Okay, so you're gonna pray for him. Okay, you're up. Go ahead.
I'd say an 8. Whoa. Are you? Because both my cousins, or the ones that I don't get to see very often, are here.
Where's he from again?
Well, he's from Texas, but he moved to Illinois, North Carolina.
Now he lives in North Carolina?
Yeah. And my other cousin, she goes to Texas A&M. I don't see her very much, so.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
And then the bad thing, I was sick last week, so.
You're still sick? All right. Evan, you're up. Okay, best and worst?
I had a doubleheader yesterday. Yeah.
I assume that was a good thing.
Back to back.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Now I know what
And I hurt everywhere from it. But it was
Okay.
because I was pitcher and catcher, so my knees and my arm hurt.
Oops.